Hey guys. This is a subject that I have been wrestling with about talking about for quite some time. It's about living with a partner who is addicted to drugs. I'm very blessed now to have the husband that I've got, my second husband. Now, in a lot of my videos, you've heard me talk about my ex, but I've never explained to you why he's my ex. We met back in 1990. I was working at a gas station convenience store, and he was one of my customers, and we hooked up from there. And we didn't initially date, but we were boyfriend and girlfriend for 4 months, and then we got a little bit too antsy with each other, and I got pregnant. So we got married. The day that we was to get married, he got off work and he stopped by before he went home to take a nap because he worked the night shift. And he told me that he took speed. Now, any of you who don't know what speed is, at least in their terms and his terms, is diet pills. He was taking diet pills. And so, as anybody may think, okay, I can change them. He was giving me a chance to bail out before I made the commitment to him. And my thought was, I can change him. I'll work with him. I can change him. I'll pray for him, and I'll talk to him, and I'll change him. So we got married, and we had our daughter September 16th of 1991. And it was okay, him taking the speed wasn't so bad. He didn't have any ill effects from it other than just staying energetic. But he also liked to drink, which I didn't even think anything about the drinking. I knew that sometimes he would go up at the top of the mountain that was at the head of my holler. We lived in single lane roads. And so he would go drinking up into the mountains, and I knew that, but I didn't think anything of that when I married him. And he would stay out at night with his brother drinking, and then come home, and he'd be all loving to me and make it up to me and stuff. So eventually he had gotten a good job working for his brother-in-law, and he had an accident. He had tripped on a cinder block and twisted wrong, and it ended up messing up his back. So he started taking Tylenol 3s. Well, it got to the point that the Tylenol 3s weren't enough, and then he started working for another man where he was a maintenance on coal trucks, on 10-wheelers. And so he didn't have the proper equipment to tend to the tires and the parts that was needing to be replaced on these trucks, and that aggravated his back injury. He ended up slipping some discs, and so the Tylenol 3s weren't enough, and he started taking Lorcets. Now, the one thing about my ex is He's got one of those disorders where he's easily addicted to stuff. He smokes. He did manage to quit drinking, but, you know, it almost got to the point that he became a blown-out alcoholic, and he was delivered from that. But it got to the point that the Lorsets got out of hand, and he was taking more than what he could take. And then he was taking Xanaxes and Samas. Now, Samas are muscle relaxers. Xanaxes are nerve pills. So he would take Samas and Xanaxes along with Lorsets and Tylenol 3s. And it got to the point that he was at this stage of mind where he didn't care one bit. Now, there was some times that I ended up screwing up infidelity-wise in our marriage. And it ended up in divorce. Me and him ended up divorcing, but after being apart for close to 7 months, we hooked back up again, lived with each other for a year, and remarried. So with the drug induction, he never forgave me for my screw up. He never forgave me for that. The reason why that I had even done that, sadly, though, is because the person that he was working for when he was maintenance on the trucks was keeping him out so much that I was alone. I was alone. And I'm going to tell you this. I know it's no excuse, but it happens. When you're a lonely spouse, you can end up screwing up. I loved my husband very much, and but because of him hanging with his boss more than being home, and his boss was supplying him with the speed and the pain medication, whatever he needed, you know, it got to the point I was lonely, and I was messing up mentally, and it caused me to screw that up. So when we got back together, he had never really completely forgiven me for that. And it was the drugs that was keeping him mentally induced to the point that he didn't even give a darn to try to make our marriage work. So the Xanaxes made it the worst, honest. And finally, he stopped taking the Xanaxes. And when he did, he started having more of a heart again. Because this man has a true heart. He's got his mother's heart. My ex-mother-in-law, my late mother-in-law, because she passed away in 2000, she had a beautiful heart. And he does too. But when he was doing so much drugs, he ended up having more of his dad's older heart, which, you know, my late father-in-law, who died in 2007, he, before he had gotten saved, before he had gotten born again with Jesus Christ, he was bad for drinking, and so he carried somewhat of a bad attitude, which ran in the family basically through through his mother. And so my husband, with the drug induction, behaved more like his dad's family than he did his mom. Even though he has his mom's attitude, he really is seriously a beautiful person, honest. And so I dealt so much with that, and him pointing the finger at me, especially when he was on the Xanaxes, him pointing the finger at me reminded me of what I had done and that he couldn't trust me and everything and stuff. After the Xanaxes, it did improve, though, his attitude. But unfortunately, because he was still doing drugs, once again, I went astray in our marriage. I'm not excusing myself one bit, okay? I should have kept strong. I could have kept strong, but with all the circumstances, I was looking for something better. I was looking for something that wasn't into drugs, something that was more caring, loving, nurturing. And so, once again, I gave my husband reason not to trust me. But all this time, he had continued doing drugs, even though he had stopped doing the Xanaxes. He had even stopped doing Samas, But he was still taking too many Lorcets. And then he started taking a little bit harder of a pain medication, a little harder than Lorcets. And he even started to, he was in constant pain because he had 5 slip discs, okay? And so he was in constant pain, and he was constantly trying to get out of pain, and he was miserable, and I could understand that. Finally, though, there came a point in time that my mother ministered to me, and that got me to really seriously straighten up and be there for my husband and stop with the strain. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done between me and him. There was hardly any reconcile. I tried hard to be a better wife to him, more supporting to him, tried to help his back feel better, but I'd give him massages and tried to encourage him to completely stop the drugs and things. And, he constantly said how much he wanted not to do drugs. Now, what made it so hard was, for one, the finances was gone. He was on a disability check because of the slip discs, so he couldn't work. And even when he had tried to work, it would lay him on the couch for weeks. So it just got to the point that he couldn't work. Now, we would go into the hills and dig some roots, but even that would put him down for a few days. So he was on a disability check, and I'd done what I could with that check. I did what I could, pay the bills, get a few groceries, because we was also getting food stamps to make up for the difference. And so I would do what I could with what we had. But the majority of that money always went out toward his supply. Now, there was one point in time in our earlier years together that if I didn't make sure to have that in the budget for him to go get something, he would get fighting mad, almost to the point of looking like he was going to slap me, which he didn't. But, it was scary times. It was very scary times. And so eventually we kind of made an agreement. So he would take out just so much, and that would take care of his supply. Now, I know every bit of this, it's so wrong to go to dealers and stuff. But the thing is, it's real. People does this. It's real. It's out there. It's real. And the spouses or the partners do suffer, unless, of course, they do it themselves. And then if they do it themselves, there's constant fights over who's going to get what, who gets the most money, who gets the most, constant fighting, because the mental state is so messed up. I know a lot of people, a lot of partners, they're not necessarily married. A lot of times they don't marry, they just shack up. Anyway, so I know a lot of situations where there was fights. me and my ex fought all the time, and most of the time it had to do with finances because of. And so it really got to be a mental struggle for me. Even though I had stopped straying, it was still a mental struggle for me. And so I prayed more for my husband, for the addiction to stop, for God to change him, for God to work with him, because he had accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior finally. So my prayer was that he would grow in Christ and that he would stop taking the medications, and even that God would heal his body, you know. And now, sad to say, very sad to say, this is the guilt that I carry sometimes, and I have to remember that God forgave me and God has got me in a better place. But toward the end of mine and my husband's marriage, I had joined a weight loss site, which I have mentioned before, and I met my now husband. Me and him became good friends and even fell in love. And so I found my opportunity to escape my ex with the drugs. I found my escape. And so my now husband was willing to come and get me and take me away from that. It's something that I do have to deal with all the time, because I didn't do it differently, but I had no way of escape. You know, I had no way to escape out of that because the drugs was still there. Even though my ex-husband's attitude had changed, there was still that drug abuse going on. And it was still affecting our marriage and our finances. And it was still mentally breaking me down, even though I was constantly praying. And I had told my kids. By this time we finally had 3 children and even a granddaughter. And I had told my kids about the man, and I told them that I wanted them to come with me. They wanted to stay behind with their dad. And I had gone through 25 years of fighting with my ex. I had no energy left to fight. I literally had no mentality left to fight. A lot of my shaking, even though I've got benign tremors, and that's hereditary. My mother shakes, my grandpa shook. But a lot of it is nerve shot, where I had gone through all that in the 25 years of my marriage with my ex. So a lot of the shaking is from my nerves. And when I get extremely nervous or upset, I shake worse. So, it was very difficult, and I know that there are people who lives with even worse abuse than that, even worse. A lot of women are brutalized, or even men are brutalized because their spouse or partner is staying stoned, taking the wrong kind of drugs. God did look out for me, and I was never brutalized by my husband, but I was mentally and emotionally stressed and abused. It wasn't brutal, but it was there, and it was enough to affect me. So I did leave my children behind. Now, I'm going to tell you, that doesn't make me a bad mother, okay? The one thing I knew for sure about my ex is that he loves his children more than anything, and he would fight to the death to protect them. A lot of times when we went up into the hills to get root, it wasn't for me and him. It wasn't for him to get drugs. It wasn't for him to get cigarettes. It was because either we was cold because we heated with kerosene at the time. So we would do that to either get kerosene or because it was toward the end of the month and we was hungry. Because I did what I could with the food stamps, but you can only get so much with food stamps. And if you ain't getting money throughout the month, you can't get more than what you can get out of the food stamps. And so I did what I could, but by the end of the month we would be hungry. And so me and him would go get roots to make sure that the kids had a couple dinners. That's how he was. There was a couple times that like his kids wanted something specific or needed money for something specific, and he would go alone and herb, what we call herbing. He would go and dig roots and make sure to give every dime to the child that needed it. Like I said, he's got a great heart. So I knew that my children wouldn't be in danger because he would look after them. And sure enough, when I left, he stood up, matured overnight. Or at least it seemed like overnight to me. But nonetheless, he took responsibility because he didn't want to lose his children. That was important to him. He knew that at least with me being there, he wouldn't lose his kids because I was the stone, you know. But without me, he knew that he would lose the kids because of his drugs. So he sought help, and he started taking a certain medication to get him off of the other drugs. And it worked. Now, he doesn't even take that other drug. But because of me leaving, he straightened up for our kids. And now everything that he does is toward the kids. It's for the kids. He doesn't want anything for himself other than cigarettes. He looks out for our children. So, you know, yeah, I lived in a mild case where I wasn't physically brutalized, but the torment was still there emotionally and mentally. And even though I did wrong by running away with another man, in the end, it actually made it worth it because I am with a good Christian man now. And I know as Christians we wouldn't have done that, but we did. We actually did. Which, you know, God has already forgiven us. Me and my husband both has asked God to forgive us for us doing this without me properly going through the right channel to get away from my ex. And a lot of Christians believe that there shouldn't be any divorce, but I'm going to tell you this. There are certain circumstances where God allows it to happen. There was one night I was praying because I was torn. I told God, I said, Father, I'm not wanting to do anything against you. I know that you don't like divorce. I said, I don't want to do anything against you, and I don't want to leave with this man if you don't approve. And the Holy Ghost told me for me to be patient, that he is going to close doors that needs to be closed, and he is going to open doors that needs to be opened. I even asked God to forgive me because I fell in love with my now husband. I really felt bad, you know, because when I went through that one time, and Mom ministered to me, and I decided that I was going to be there for my husband. I had set it straight in my mind that I would never go astray again. So I wasn't praying to find a man. I wasn't praying for God to get me out of my marriage. I was praying for my marriage. I don't know if my ex would have stopped taking drugs by now, if I'd still be with him. I don't know. But I do know that me getting out of there gave him a reason to quit. Especially because our kids wanted to stay with their dad. And it hurts me because I don't have my babies. But at the same time, it makes me feel good because of them. He straightened up. You know, because of them, he stopped. Now my prayer for my ex is that he never goes back to drugs, because he still has those slip discs. He's still in constant pain. But my prayer for him now is that he never goes back to drugs. And that he continues being there for his kids. And that God touches his life. And that he grows close to the Lord. We all make mistakes, guys. We all make mistakes, and no one is perfect. No one. Living with a spouse or partner that is a drug abuser is difficult. You try to be there for them. You try to support them. I remember how hard it was on his mom and dad. Because it's not easy being a parent, having to see that with your child either. It's not easy. And you try to be there. You try to support them. You try to encourage them to quit, to do better for their life, to do better for their health and stuff. And it's hard mentally. Now, I'm not saying that divorce or running away with somebody else is the answer. I'm not saying that at all. It's just how it ended up being for me. That me getting out of that, even though the way that I'd done it was wrong, me getting out of that was the best thing that happened to me, because now I'm not stressed out. I'm not mentally torn up. I'm happier now. And I'm with a man who loves me and not drugs, you know. And another good thing about me and my ex, after me and him both forgave each other, because I went back in 2017 in attempts to reconcile with my ex and become his wife again. Emotionally, it wasn't working for me. Emotionally, it wasn't. As much as I love him, I still love my ex. I love him very much. But emotionally, there was something there that wasn't right. And he treated me better. He had more concern for me, more respect for me. He had forgiven me, and I forgave him. And I treated him with more respect. We was there for each other. We cared more for each other. But there was something emotional and mental that was keeping me from staying there. So I came back here after being with my ex for about 7 months. And I married my now husband. I had to live with that guilt, but I think the one thing that really worked out for me going back in 2017 was not only did I get to know my ex-husband again in a new light, but I got to make it up to my children. I asked all of them to forgive me. My relationship with my family isn't the same anymore. It's not the same. My kids have grown up. My son is 16 now. He's the baby. My middle child, my daughter, is going to be 20 this year. And my oldest daughter is going to be 28. Both girls are going to be in September, 20 and 28. My granddaughter is going to be turning 9 this June. But I got to ask them to forgive me for walking out on them, for leaving them. I didn't want to give up on my husband. I didn't want to give up on him. But the drugs stayed in between us. So, I want to say to any of you who are suffering, I can't help you if you do drugs. All I can say is you're hurting your partner or your spouse or your parents or even any relative. You're hurting them bad. You're hurting them really bad emotionally. Even if you don't lay a hand on them, you're hurting them emotionally and mentally. And to any of you who are suffering because you've got a loved one, pray. Please don't give up the faith on God. Pray. If you're not saved, if you don't believe in prayer, do what you can to be supportive and to encourage that loved one to quit. Do what you can. And if you have to walk away, if you just have to walk away because you can't take it anymore mentally, don't be afraid to walk away. But I know it hurts. It hurts, I know. I was determined not to cry for this, but I definitely wasn't perfect in my marriage. I wasn't. I hurt him a lot too. I was guilty of a lot in our marriage. And a lot of it was because I was just simply looking for something better than what I had. But as I was trying to say, since I left and after we forgave one another, me and him are better friends now than we've ever been. And we love and care about each other even more. We've got a better respect for one another now. And I'm always going to pray for him. Because I do love him. Because I do care. Just as I'm always going to pray for my children. Anyway, I'm here for any of you, and if you're suffering in a situation like this, if you're dealing with something similar, I'm here, if anything, just to pray about it with you. You can reach out to me, and I'll support you mentally the best I can. Because I've been there. And if your case is even worse than mine, at least give it to me so I could be praying about it, because I'll do that. I'll do that for you. Anyway, guys, I really do love you so very much, and I appreciate you, and so I do. It's not easy living with drug abuse. I'm here for you, and if any of you need someone to talk to about. Anyway, guys, have a great day.